Impossible. This tattoo, you have it too?
Not also have, but have had it since before you even put on your first uniform.
But
U.S. Delta Force mocked the old veteran's tattoo until the general rolled up his sleeve. When Delta Force operator Jake Cutler mocked 81-year-old Glenn Patterson's faded tattoo at Murphy's Diner, he thought he'd caught another stolen valor fake until General Thorne revealed the same Project Omega insignia. Day 1, 6:47 a.m. Murphy's Diner outside Fort Bragg, coffee steam, morning rush. Glenn Patterson, 81, sat alone, faded tattoo barely visible beneath age spots. Jake Cutler entered like he owned the place. Delta Force, Purple Heart, everything his grandfather had pretended to be. Jake Cutler, 28, carried more than just military decorations. He carried shame. His grandfather, war hero Bill Cutler, had lied for 40 years about Vietnam service. Family legend, local celebrity, VFW speeches about battles he'd never fought. Truth came out at Grandpa's funeral. No military records, no combat service, just a supply clerk who'd bought fake medals at pawn shops. Your grandfather was a fraud, relatives whispered. Whole families probably liars. Jake joined military to restore family honor, became everything Grandpa pretended to be. But trauma ran deeper. If war hero Grandpa was fake, maybe Jake's own service meant nothing. Now Jake saw stolen valor everywhere, hypervigilant, aggressive, had exposed 17 fakes in 3 months. Glenn Patterson represented everything Jake hated. Old man with suspicious military story that couldn't be verified. Project Omega tattoo looked homemade, faded, probably fake like Grandpa's Purple Heart. Time to expose another liar, Jake muttered. Rodriguez, Jake's partner, recognized the signs. Jake, leave the old man alone. You're seeing phantoms again. General Marcus Thorne sat nearby, reviewing reports. Real Project Omega veteran whose classified service had been authenticated long ago. He recognized both the tattoo and the pain young soldier whose wounds weren't visible but were clearly bleeding. Some scars are hidden, others hunt for validation by destroying what they fear most, being exposed as fraudulent themselves. Jake's need to expose fake veterans versus Glenn's genuine service. Jake's family shame driving aggressive behavior that would either find vindication or create more trauma when truth emerged. 6:52 a.m. confrontation begins. Nice tattoo, Pops. What's that supposed to be? Glenn looked up. Kid's eyes held pain masquerading as aggression. Military unit marking. Yeah? Which unit? Because that looks like something you drew yourself. Glenn's silence triggered Jake's trauma. Grandpa used to dodge questions the same way. Let me guess, classified, right? Can't talk about it? That's what they all say when they're caught lying. Project Omega, Detachment B-50, Vietnam. Jake's pulse quickened. Bullshit. I know everything about Omega. You picked wrong unit to fake, old man. But Jake's knowledge came from desperate research after Grandpa's exposure, trying to become expert on units Grandpa had falsely claimed, ensuring Jake would never be fooled again. Tell me about mobile launch sites, Glenn said quietly. Standard forward operating bases, everyone knows that. Tell me about Roadrunner teams? Jake hesitated. This wasn't basic information. Indigenous personnel conducting reconnaissance. His confidence wavered. This old man knew details that Google didn't contain. Emotional tension. Jake's validation needs fighting against growing doubt. 6:54 a.m. Escalation. You're testing me? Jake's voice cracked slightly. I know my military history, unlike frauds like you who buy tattoos to impress people. Like your grandfather did? The words hit like IED blast. Glenn had seen the pain, recognized the wound. "Don't talk about my grandfather. Lot of pain in that anger, son. Someone hurt you with fake stories?" Jake's facade crumbled momentarily. "My grandfather, he lied about everything. 40 years of war stories that never happened, made our whole family look like fools." Glenn nodded with understanding. "So now you see liars everywhere?" "Because they are everywhere. Fake medals, fake service, fake heroes taking credit for other people's sacrifice." Rodriguez moved closer. "Jake, maybe—" "No, this is exactly what Grandpa did. Faded tattoo, vague stories, claims about classified service that can't be verified." Jake grabbed Glenn's wrist, staring at the tattoo. "This is homemade. Prison ink. You never served anywhere except county jail." But General Thorne had heard enough. Young soldiers' pain was destroying innocent veteran. 6:56 a.m. Intervention. Staff Sergeant Cutler. Jake froze. General's voice. Authority. "Sir, release Mr. Patterson immediately." "General, this civilian is committing stolen valor fraud." "Son, you're making a mistake that's about to end your career." Thorne approached, rolling up his sleeve. Identical tattoo. Same faded Greek omega, parachute, lightning bolt. Jake's world tilted. 2 identical tattoos? Impossible coincidence unless— "Glenn Patterson, founding member of Detachment B-50, I served under protocols he established." Jake stared at both tattoos. His grandfather's deception had made him incapable of recognizing authentic service. "No, this can't be real. You're both lying. Conspiracy to—" "Jake," Glenn said gently, "your pain is real. Your grandfather's lies hurt you, but hurting innocent veterans won't heal that wound." "I have to expose fakes," Jake shouted, tears streaming. "It's the only way to honor real service that Grandpa dishonored." The breakdown was complete. Family shame had driven Jake to attack the very heroes he joined military to emulate. Cliffhanger, Jake's emotional collapse as his mission to expose fraud accidentally targets authentic legend. 6:58 a.m. Aftermath of breakdown. Jake sat trembling while decades of buried shame had exploded through military composure that trauma couldn't maintain under emotional pressure. "My whole family, we lived a lie for 40 years. Grandpa's war stories at every holiday. VFW speeches, local parades, all fake." Glenn and Thorne exchanged glances. Both recognized psychological wound that military service alone couldn't heal. "Jake," Glenn said carefully, "your grandfather's deception doesn't define your service. Your combat record is real." "Is it? How do I know anything's real when family hero was fraud? Maybe I'm just pretending too. Maybe none of it matters." Rodriguez knelt beside her partner. "Jake, I've served with you for 3 years. Watched you save lives in Afghanistan. Your service is real." But Jake's crisis ran deeper than logic could reach. Grandpa's lies had infected everything's self-worth, military pride, ability to trust authentic heroes when they appeared. "Mr. Patterson," Jake whispered, "show me your real records. Prove you're not like him." Glenn's response surprised everyone. "Can't prove anything, son. Records were destroyed. Have to take my word just like you had to take your grandfather's." The parallel was devastating. Jake faced choosing faith in another old soldier's unverifiable story. 7:02 a.m. Diner awareness. Other patrons had noticed commotion, while Jake's emotional breakdown had attracted attention that privacy couldn't maintain in public setting. "That soldier's hurtin'," elderly waitress whispered to cook. "Someone should help him." But Glenn was already helping through method these civilians couldn't understand, not minimizing pain, but acknowledging it while offering different path forward. Jake, want to know difference between your grandfather and authentic veterans? Jake nodded, desperate for any distinction that could restore faith in military service. Real veterans don't need constant validation. We don't tell stories seeking praise. Most of us stay quiet because missions were classified or memories hurt too much. Thorne added, your grandfather needed attention because he had nothing real to share. Glenn barely speaks about Omega because he has everything to protect. Jake processed this while understanding that silence might indicate authenticity rather than deception, opposite of everything he'd believed since Grandpa's exposure. But how do you tell difference? How do you know who's real? You don't, Glenn admitted. Sometimes faith is required. Sometimes you have to trust fellow soldiers until proven otherwise. The concept terrified Jake, whose worldview had been built on hypervigilant suspicion that everyone was potentially fraudulent like Grandpa had been. 7:08 a.m. Choosing faith. Jake faced impossible choice, maintain defensive suspicion, or risk believing another unverifiable military story that could be Grandpa's deception repeated. Mr. Patterson, tell me something only real Omega veteran would know, something I can't research. Glenn was quiet for a long moment. Jake, asking me to prove authenticity is asking me to compromise classified oath. Real Omega veterans won't do that for anyone's validation. The refusal somehow felt more authentic than cooperation would have. Grandpa would have invented elaborate details to maintain his lie. My grandfather would have made up stories, Jake whispered, detailed ones. You're telling me to have faith without proof. That's what military service requires, faith in fellow soldiers when verification isn't possible. Thorne offered different perspective. Jake, your mission to expose stolen valor comes from love of authentic service. That love is real even if it's been misdirected through family trauma. But I've been wrong about you, Mr. Patterson. What if I'm wrong about others? What if I've hurt innocent veterans? Glenn's response was gentle. Probably have. Trauma makes us see enemies where allies exist, but recognizing mistake is first step toward healing. Jake's tears returned while understanding that hypervigilance had been trauma response rather than heroic mission to protect military honor. 7:15 a.m. Internal reckoning. Jake's worldview was collapsing while everything he'd believed about distinguishing authentic from fraudulent service had been proven wrong through personal example. How do I trust my judgment about anything? Spent 3 years exposing fake veterans. What if some were real? The possibility haunted him while understanding that Grandpa's trauma had created secondary casualties among innocent veterans who'd faced Jake's aggressive investigations. Glenn made decision that classified oath had protected, but human compassion demanded, Jake, want to know why I stay quiet about Omega? Jake nodded while hoping for answer that could rebuild faith in authentic military service. Lost 17 brothers during missions that officially never happened. Their families never knew how they died, where they died, why they died. I carry their stories, but can't share them. The pain in Glenn's voice was unmistakable trauma that silence had protected, but also prolonged through isolation. Your grandfather invented stories to feel important. Real veterans carry stories too painful to share. That's often the difference. Jake understood while recognizing that authentic trauma looked different from fraudulent bragging that Grandpa had demonstrated through attention-seeking behavior. Mr. Patterson, I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. Family trauma made me attack heroes I'd sworn to honor. Emotional moment number 1. Jake recognizing that healing requires acknowledging harm his trauma had caused to innocent veterans. Day 2, Sunday morning. Jake hadn't slept. 17 stolen valor cases he'd pursued haunted him, while possibility that trauma had made him attack authentic veterans created crisis deeper than career consequences. Rodriguez, need your help researching cases I've investigated? What if I was wrong about some of them? Rodriguez found files while Jake's obsessive documentation had created paper trail of his aggressive pursuit of suspected fraudulent veterans. Jake, this case from last month, disabled veteran you reported for suspicious Purple Heart. Investigation cleared him, but damage to his reputation. Jake's stomach dropped while reviewing evidence with clarity that emotional breakdown had provided through recognition of his traumatic patterns. Case after case revealed same pattern. Jake's hypervigilance creating suspicion where evidence didn't support accusations. Families hurt. Reputations damaged. Veterans traumatized by investigations. Oh God, Rodriguez, I've been destroying innocent people because Grandpa destroyed my ability to trust. But deeper crisis was developing while Jake's reputation for stolen valor expertise had made him key witness in federal case against veteran whose benefits were being challenged. Jake, you're scheduled to testify Thursday against Thomas Mitchell, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, claimed service in Iraq. Jake reviewed Mitchell's file with new perspective while recognizing pattern. Quiet veteran whose story couldn't be completely verified through conventional records. What if Mitchell is real? What if my testimony destroys authentic veteran like I almost destroyed Mr. Patterson? The moral crisis exceeded professional concerns while Jake faced choice between maintaining career built on stolen valor expertise or admitting systematic error that could free potentially innocent veteran. Sunday, 6 p.m., moral crossroads. Jake called Glenn while needing guidance from veteran whose authenticity had been proven through personal character rather than documentary evidence. Mr. Patterson, need advice about something that's eating me alive. Glenn listened while Jake described Mitchell's case and internal crisis about testifying against veteran whose guilt had been assumed through Jake's traumatic lens. What does your gut tell you about this, Mitchell? Same thing it told me about you, suspicious story, gaps in records, quiet demeanor that could indicate deception, or could indicate trauma that silence protects. Jake processed parallel while understanding that authentic veterans often appeared suspicious to someone whose grandfather's lies had created hypervigilance about fraudulent claims. If I don't testify, Mitchell keeps benefits he might not deserve. If I do testify based on trauma-driven suspicion, I might destroy innocent veterans' life. Glenn's response came from decades of carrying difficult decisions. Jake, sometimes protecting innocent people matters more than punishing guilty ones. Better to err toward mercy than vengeance. But what if he's really fraud? What if I let actual stolen valor case slip through because of what happened with you? Then you'll have protected someone who needed protection. Military values include defending vulnerable people even when you're not certain they deserve it. Jake faced impossible choice while understanding that family trauma had compromised his ability to distinguish authentic from fraudulent military service. Emotional moment was 2. Jake choosing mercy over certainty while accepting that trauma had made him unreliable judge of military authenticity. Monday, day 3. Jake requested meeting with prosecutors while decision to withdraw testimony would require explanation that career consequences couldn't outweigh moral obligations. Sir, need to withdraw from Mitchell case. Personal circumstances have compromised my objectivity regarding stolen valor assessment. Sergeant Cutler, you're our key witness. Mitchell case depends on your expertise. That expertise was built on family trauma rather than professional judgment. Can't risk destroying innocent veteran because of personal issues affecting my ability to evaluate authenticity. The admission required courage, while acknowledging systematic error could end career built on stolen valor investigations that hypervigilance had driven. Prosecutors were furious while understanding that Jake's withdrawal would likely result in Mitchell's case being dismissed through lack of credible testimony. Cutler, this decision affects your military career and civilian employment prospects after discharge. Stolen valor expertise was your specialty. Sir, protecting innocent veterans matters more than protecting reputation built on potentially false accusations. Jake's decision had broader implications, while other cases he'd investigated would require review through new understanding about trauma affecting judgment. Glenn's influence had been profound, while authentic veterans' character had inspired Jake to choose integrity over self-preservation when moral crisis demanded difficult choice. 1 month later, Jake's military career survived, while honest admission about trauma-driven errors had earned respect rather than punishment from command, whose understanding recognized psychological wound requiring treatment. Your recognition of the problem and steps taken to address it demonstrate integrity that military values demand, Colonel Martinez announced. Glenn had agreed to counsel Jake while their weekly breakfast meetings had become informal therapy, addressing trauma that family deception had created through systematic betrayal. Jake, healing requires forgiving your grandfather while maintaining appropriate boundaries about authentic service that respect rather than suspicion should guide. Military counseling addressed underlying trauma, while Jake's hypervigilance had been redirected toward positive investigation that verified rather than attacked veteran claims requiring assistance. Thomas Mitchell's case had been dismissed, while review of Jake's other investigations had resulted in several veterans being cleared of fraudulent accusations. Mitchell sent thank you card, Jake showed Glenn, said he'd given up hope that anyone would believe his service was real. Glenn's response reflected military wisdom. Sometimes, protecting innocent people requires admitting we were wrong about assumptions that trauma had created rather than evidence had supported. 3 months later, Veterans Administration invited Jake to develop new protocols for investigating stolen valor claims. While his experience with both authentic and fraudulent cases had provided unique perspective, Jake's journey from hypervigilant investigator to compassionate advocate demonstrates growth that personal trauma can inspire when healing meets professional responsibility, VA administrator explained. Glenn participated in program development, while his classified experience had been combined with Jake's investigative background, creating comprehensive approach. New protocols emphasize supporting authentic veterans while identifying actual fraud through evidence rather than suspicion that psychological wounds might create. Jake's testimony before Congressional Committee addressed systematic problems affecting veteran verification, while personal experience had provided credibility that policy changes required. Trauma from family deception made me see enemies where allies existed. Military community needs healing rather than hypervigilance when evaluating fellow veterans' claims. Glenn's presence during testimony had provided moral support, while their unlikely friendship had demonstrated redemption possible when accountability met genuine remorse. Media coverage focused on transformation's story, while Jake's evolution from aggressive investigator to veteran advocate had inspired others facing similar trauma. Opposition from veteran groups claimed new protocols would enable actual fraud, while some organizations preferred aggressive investigation over compassionate verification that false positives might create. Jake Cutler's approach prioritizes protecting fraudulent claims over identifying legitimate stolen valor cases that damage authentic veterans' reputation, veteran advocacy argued. Jake's response addressed concerns while acknowledging balance between protecting innocent veterans and identifying actual fraud required careful consideration. My experience taught me that trauma-driven suspicion hurts more innocent people than methodical investigation that evidence supports rather than assumptions that psychological wounds create. Congressional hearings revealed systematic problems, while Jake's case had demonstrated institutional need for trauma-informed approaches to veteran services requiring psychological understanding. Glenn testified about classified veterans' unique challenges, while his experience had influenced policy protecting veterans whose service couldn't be verified through conventional documentation. Federal legislation addressing veteran verification had been influenced, while Jake's transformation had demonstrated healing potential when trauma received appropriate treatment rather than professional exploitation. Congressional passage of Compassionate Verification Act required trauma-informed approaches, while veteran investigation protocols had been reformed through Jake's experience, demonstrating systematic improvement. This law ensures veteran verification protects innocent service members while identifying actual fraud through evidence-based investigation rather than trauma-driven suspicion, President announced. Veterans Administration implemented comprehensive training, while Jake's case had become standard curriculum about addressing investigator bias that psychological wounds might create. Jake's establishment of Grandfather's Legacy Foundation addressed family trauma affecting military families, while his healing had inspired systematic support for others facing similar deception. Foundation helps military families process trauma when family members commit stolen valor, providing support that shame and betrayal require through community understanding. Glenn served as foundation advisor, while his relationship with Jake had demonstrated healing possible when authentic veterans supported traumatized investigators requiring guidance. 1 year later, Jake's wedding included Glenn as honorary grandfather, while their friendship had replaced family relationship that deception had destroyed through authentic connection. Glenn taught me that military service continues through supporting fellow veterans rather than attacking them based on trauma that suspicious families create. Glenn's speech honored Jake's growth. Some soldiers heal from combat wounds, others from family wounds. Jake's courage in facing trauma demonstrates strength that battlefield valor shares with emotional recovery. Their weekly breakfast meetings continued while Murphy's Diner had become site of ongoing healing rather than site of traumatic confrontation. Jake's new career as veteran advocate had been built on foundation of understanding trauma rather than exploiting it for professional advancement that authentication had provided. Some families create heroes, others create wounds, but healing happens when authentic service meets genuine remorse and transforms trauma into compassion for fellow veterans. Jake's marriage to Rodriguez had been strengthened through their shared experience supporting each other during his psychological healing that authentic mentorship had enabled. The Grandfather's Legacy Foundation addressed family trauma affecting 300-plus military families, while federal legislation required compassionate verification protecting innocent veterans from trauma-driven investigation. Jake's transformation from aggressive investigator to healing advocate had influenced veteran services at 50-plus facilities requiring trauma-informed approaches. Glenn's mentorship had demonstrated authentic veteran potential for healing traumatized investigators whose families had been damaged by stolen valor. Thomas Mitchell's case dismissal had inspired review of 200-plus investigations, while several innocent veterans had been cleared of fraudulent accusations. Military counseling protocols had been enhanced, while Jake's psychological healing had influenced systematic support for trauma affecting veteran families. Congressional testimony had resulted in comprehensive verification reform, while individual transformation had inspired collective change, protecting vulnerable veterans from investigation bias. VA oversight had ensured continued compliance, while veteran rights had gained permanent protection through policy changes that one man's healing had inspired when trauma met authentic mentorship. 5 years later, Jake Cutler served on National Veteran Verification Review Board, while his grandfather's deception had inspired federal policy protecting innocent veterans from trauma-driven investigation that psychological wounds created through family betrayal. Glenn's continuing mentorship had created sustainable support networks for military families whose trust had been damaged by stolen valor, affecting authentic service recognition. Rodriguez's partnership had demonstrated healing possible when trauma received appropriate support rather than professional exploitation that authentication had enabled. They learned that some scars are hidden, others hunt for validation. But the most important healing happens when authentic service meets traumatic suspicion and transforms investigation into compassion through mentorship that guides wounded investigators toward protecting rather than attacking fellow veterans whose service deserves verification through evidence rather than assumptions that family deception creates when trust gets shattered by those closest to military families whose honor depends on community support rather than individual trauma. Some scars are hidden, others hunt for validation. But the most important healing happens when authentic service meets traumatic suspicion and transforms investigation into compassion that protects rather than attacks fellow veterans.